Hello and welcome to JBCTR2. If you're new around here, my name is Johnny and today we're building an editing rig for editing videos on both JBCTR and JBCTR2. Now, before we get into the editing rig build, I wanted to tell you a little bit about me, my background, and why we're doing this. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll know that I create 4K content, mainly around the automotive world, which is where JBCTR comes in. JBCTR2 is going to be tech focused, and in order to pump out videos, I need something decent. Now, currently, this is my editing rig. It's a Dell XPS 9570. With a funky case on it, as you can see. To this day, it's actually been quite good. It's got 32 gigabytes of RAM, an i9 mobile chip processor, which is still pretty beefy, and a 1050 Ti graphics card, which is 4 gig. Now, in itself, those specs really quite good, and for 4K content creation, especially on the move, amazing. It's really good. The issue that I have, or had, recently is I had a series going on JBCTR where I was releasing a video every single day of the week, and unfortunately midway through that week the motherboard went on this thing. Now, the reason the motherboard went within 6 months of this thing being mine is because of heat. Now, with video creation, obviously it's quite intense on the old components, which has meant that this thing has got really hot every single time I've used it. So 6 months of being used at maximum temperature, and unfortunately it didn't last too long, which is why this thing comes in. Now, as you can see, today we're building in a Fractal Designs Meshify C case, which I think looks really good. And this build needs to meet a couple of criteria. And that criteria is, first and foremost, it must be reliable, because I was absolutely mortified when this thing gave up the ghost, and I didn't really know what to do with myself, to be honest. That's quite sad. But anyway, back to this. Reliability is number one. Number two, it's obviously got to be powerful enough to do my videos. Number three, cooling, because I'm a little bit scared of cooling now after my experience with laptops. Although, given the fact that this is a desktop, I mean, we're already onto a winner. But yeah, I'm going to make sure it's cooled properly. And number four, it must look quite nice. Now, when it's turned off, this case I think looks absolutely stunning. And then when it's turned on, we've got a few RGB lighty things going into. So we'll cover that down the line. Okay, so this is what we are installing today. Now, let me talk you through my decision on parts. Now, before I go any further, I must say that this video is not sponsored in any way. I had free reign of buying whatever I wanted, and unfortunately, I've had to pay for it all. So with that in mind, this is what I've chosen, and it was done on a budget, but quite a reasonable budget. So here you go, Intel i9 CPU. Now, I understand that CPUs are controversial. People like to talk about them quite a bit. i9 9900K, 8 cores, 16 threads, and yes, I could have got more cores and more threads if I'd gone for a different CPU. I get that. However, Intel does have something called QuickSync, which allows the dedicated graphics cards in the PC to work alongside the integrated graphics within 9900K, and that works with Premiere Pro to give quite a significant advantage over the competitors when it comes to rendering speeds. Now, rendering speeds are quite clearly my biggest thing as a content creator. The quicker it renders, the quicker it performs, the more content I can produce, and therefore that's why I've gone for the 9900K. Now, these are reasonably power hungry beasts, and therefore they also produce a lot of heat. And that brings me on to my cooler. So this is the Darkrock Pro 4. It's an air cooler, which not many people opt for, especially in the world of YouTube, mainly because they're not that pretty. Yes, I could have gone for a water cooling solution, They seem to be pretty damn reliable now. All water coolers, if you buy like the all-in-one cooling loops, then they do tend to be quite reliable. I've not actually heard of anyone sort of splitting open and throwing its juice all over your PC. Water cooling, as in custom loops, was totally out because I'm after reliability. Ideally, as little maintenance as possible. I just want it to work. And ultimately, that's why I chose an air cooler. So although the all-in-one water coolers have been very reliable, they still have one mechanical part, and that is the pump, which can fail, I guess. But this doesn't have anything like that and therefore can't fail. Now, the Darkwalk Pro 4 is obviously the superseder, the next one along from the Darkwalk Pro 3. Now, Darkwalk Pro 3 had some wicked reviews. The only difference that this one has really is the ease of installation. So I'm intrigued to see if they actually have made it easier to install. I really hope they have. So yeah, look forward to putting that in. Motherboard, I've gone for the Zog Strix Z390E. Now, the reason I've gone for this one, I've got to be honest, is mainly price. It's the most expensive one I could find in my price range. That did everything I wanted it to do. So it must have had two M.2 slots, although today we're only using one of them. We'll get onto that in a minute. And it's got in-bit Wi-Fi. It's got everything that I need my componentry to do, really. Yeah, we'll see how we get on with that. Graphics, everyone loves graphics. 1660 Ti graphics card with 6 GB of memory. Now, the reason I went for this is because I had 4 GB in my laptop, and that seemed to be pretty good for what I'm using it for. So 6 gigs to match the specification of this should be pretty good. Did feel a bit strange buying such a slightly lower level graphics card, I should say, compared to the rest of the componentry, but mainly because I do a lot of my research on YouTube, and a lot of that seems to be focused around gaming. Now, I don't need epic graphics for rendering. I do need it a little bit because it's used for like upscaling 4K footage and that kind of stuff. So this should be more than enough for what I need. I'm actually quite looking forward to seeing how it performs. What else we got? We got RAM. I have gone for 64 gigabytes of 3200 megahertz in the form of a Vengeance Pro, mainly because it was the best price on Amazon at the time for that amount of memory. Now, yes, that is a lot of memory. I get it. Laptop had 32 gigabytes of RAM, which was probably enough, to be honest. But when it comes to video rendering, however much RAM you have, the software will use all of it. And the more you have, the quicker it is, and therefore 64 gigabytes to me seems like the right amount for this build. Cooling, case cooling, going back to the Darkwalk Pro stuff. This is perhaps overkill. I'm going to be replacing the fans in the case with these fancy dancy Corsair white LED ones. I'm going to go for 3 at the front, mainly for aesthetics, if I'm going to be brutally honest, and then a singular one at the back for the exhaust. So we'll see how they look when they're installed. What else we got? Right, 1 terabyte of M.2 SSD storage. This was super fast on my laptop, so I will stick with the same thing. It's not vast amounts of storage for the PC, but I tend to store everything externally, and this will only be used to run my operating system and edit the footage of the video that I'm currently editing. And then as soon as it's edited, it'll be shipped off this computer onto external storage, and then we're away. So 1 terabyte should be more than enough, and I have a second M.2 slot in my motherboard, as mentioned previously, where I can add another one of these if needed. I'll put that over there because it's easier. Powering this is a Corsair RM650X. It's basically a power supply from a brand that I trust, and it's powerful enough to power all this lot according to some online calculators. So yeah, that's what we're doing today. And if you're interested in how I selected this lot, obviously there was a lot of research involved, but mainly I used PC Part Picker as a sort of guide, really, sort of to guide me through the process, and it was really, really, really good. And then, although PC Part Picker does give you the cheapest prices, I then also did my own research, and I did find a lot of this stuff cheaper elsewhere. And actually, I bought all of it on Amazon. At the time, Amazon did seem to be the cheapest for every single part, which is quite amazing, and it made delivery really quite easy. So yeah, that is what we're installing today. And now we're on to the exciting bit, which is starting the PC build. Now, I try to build as much as I can outside of the case, because once the motherboard is in the case, it can get a little bit fiddly. So these are the components which I believe we can install to the motherboard outside of the case. So you've got your storage, because it's M.2, it's on the motherboard itself. Obviously, if you're using disks or SSDs externally to the motherboard, then you don't need that right now. i9 CPU, that can go onto the motherboard straight away. Your RAM can also go in, and the cooler I think we can get on, but because it's quite a chunky beast, we'll have to see. So what I'll do is I'll give you guys a break from me nattering away. I'll montage the building of the motherboard, and I'll talk to you after that. Now, when it comes to M.2 installation, obviously I now have a choice. So I'm only installing one M.2 stick, and I have two M.2 drives. Now, I guess arguably you could use either of these. They both have heat sinks, but ultimately the top one here is closer to the CPU and the graphics card, which obviously produce heat. Therefore, I'm going to be using the one down the bottom because it's furthest away from everything, and therefore it should keep it cooler, and then cooler memory obviously equals quicker memory. And not only that, it also means if I need to remove this for whatever reason, I can access it more easily. I don't have to remove the graphics card or anything like that. So we're putting this into slot 2. So there we have it. That is everything that we can install onto the motherboard, installed onto the motherboard outside of the case. It was all pretty damn easy, to be honest. It's all just sort of click together stuff, and just a case of using your logical brain to make sure that everything goes in place. Of course, the only issues I did have was this Be Quiet cooler. They said the Dark-Rock Pro 4 is easier to install. Not really. It's a bit of a pain, if I'm totally honest. As I mentioned, we've got RAM clearance issues here. I've had to move this fan up a little bit. Because of where those clearance issues, this cable's now got to come around the front, and it looks a bit, well, it doesn't look great. And on the inside, this fan was pretty difficult to install, and I had to install it twice because you need to sort of lift it up away from the CPU so it doesn't get, so the fan itself doesn't get hot off the CPU. There's also clearance issues over here, which is probably specific to this motherboard. So there's a little fan here to control the VRMs or voltage modules for the new i9 CPUs. As they're super power hungry, this fan here is to cool those power modules for the CPU. There's a few more clearance issues here, although thankfully this is only held on by a single screw, so I could just sort of lean it over a little bit. But other than that, not too bad. So yeah, so that's the motherboard. Now we just got to get it into the case, and yeah, we'll do that now. And that is pretty much everything plugged in as far as I can see, which means we're now in a position to test if this works, and I really hope it does. So what we can do is literally just turn it on and make sure all the components within here all fire up as expected. If that's successful, we can then get onto cable management around the back. It's looking rather messy at the moment, but we'll sort that out. But anyway, it's power time. One successful boot test, and I am more than happy with that. Everything seemed to go according to plan. The only light illuminated on the motherboard was the boot light, and presumably that's because we're still in the boot phase. So next we are on to everyone's favourite job, a bit of cable management to make the back look a little bit nicer. Fortunately, because we're not using hard drives or anything like that, shouldn't be too difficult in this one. But yeah, we'll quickly run through it and then we can actually try this thing out. And there you have it. That is one PC built. Of course, it's not really functioning as a PC yet because we don't have Windows on it or anything like that. So next steps for this machine will be to install Windows, then install the drivers, and then of course for me, all my Adobe software, and I can then really start to put this thing to work. But for today, we'll leave that for another video. I'll do another one and I'll put a link to the description when I've done a video on how to install Microsoft from a USB flash drive and how to create one, because that's what I'm going to be doing. And yeah, I'll see you in that one. So if you enjoyed this video, then give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of me, computers, tech and all that kind of stuff, then feel free to subscribe. And if you want to see me doing car-y stuff, then I've got JVCTR2. So feel free to check out my other channel. And with that, we'll leave it there. So catch you in the next one.